Dr. Alvina, please unmute your mic. Yes. Isma, could you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, I will just, a good afternoon to everybody. Respected Member Secretary of the Goa State Biodiversity Board, Dr. Pradeep Samon Kadam. Our resource persons for today, Dr. Utkarsha Chavan, Architect Karina Kochari, Dr. Manoj Borkar, Convener and Resource Person, all our esteemed participants who have logged in from across the world, country and the state of Goa, our Vice Principal, Dr. Sister Marilazan AC, faculty who have been committed in organizing this program, and my dear students. A very warm welcome to each one of you to the regional webinar on conservation concerns of mugger crocodiles on the occasion of the World Crocodile Day 2021, organized by the Biodiversity Research Cell, Department of Zoology, Carmel College for Women, in partnership with the Goa State Biodiversity Board. For those of you who might not know, I just thought I would mention, Carmel College is the only women's institution in Goa that is dedicated to women's education since 1964. It is managed by the Apostolic Carmel Management, and we have grown into a full-fledged institution, imparting subjects in the streams of humanities, social sciences, commerce, and pure sciences for both the UG and PG students. Our students are challenged to meet the various demands of today's world, keeping in mind the relevance of values and ethos. It is with such a mindset that the Biodiversity Research Cell of the Zoology Department of Carmel College is organizing this webinar. And I'm grateful for them to giving me this opportunity to say a few words and welcome you all. We live in a perfect world with a wonderful ecosystem that houses thousands and thousands of species, each with its own role to play. Try to take out one and the others, like the domino effect, will get destroyed and fall. A delicate balance that needs to be maintained for all to survive. As humans, we tend to forget this for reasons that are beyond logic. Time and again, we need to be reminded that for our survival, we need to protect the others. On this note, I would like once again to welcome you to this webinar, where the head of the Department of Zoology, Dr. Manoj Borkar, has intelligently curated this eminent list of presentations that will trigger our mind to ask that important question: what do we stand to lose if we do not protect our muggers and their relevance to our history and culture? I thank the Biodiversity Board, who has graciously come forward to partner with us, and our convener, Dr. Manoj Borkar, who has dedicated most of his professional life in research and understanding of the wildlife and protection. A prolific writer, he campaigns for the cause of animal welfare, to be able to sustain a synchro destiny of our survival as one earth. My huge thanks also goes to the organizing committee for all their efforts, because they worked very hard behind the scenes. Dr. Sister Maria Lizanne AC, Miss Reshma Kerkar, Miss Vinita Desa, Miss Andrea D'Souza, Miss Karen Braganza, Miss Swizzle Fatardo, Dr. Priti Pereira, Miss Sonia Desai. Through the events of today's webinar, I'm sure we will learn to respect and value the crocodile and give us that gentle reminder that we are not the only ones living on planet Earth. I welcome you once again and wish you all a fruitful deliberations. Thank you. I hand over to you, Karen.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure your keen interest in our webinar has piqued the curiosity of all of us gathered here today. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we regret the delay that we have. Our keynote speaker is not here right now, so we will begin with our.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm
here,
here, madam.
Yes, sir. So let me introduce our keynote speaker for today. We have with us Dr. Pradeep Samorkadam, who is the member secretary of the Goa State Biodiversity Board. He is a member of the Goa Wetland Authority, a certified lead auditor, and the nodal officer for the state level steering committee for National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change. He has about over 15 years of experience in the industry, including the mega hazardous unit, sport and turnkey environmental consultancy sector, prior to working with the government for the last 5 years. As a proactive officer, he has taken keen interest in the involvement and capacity building of the local community. I welcome you, sir, and hand over the mic to you. Sir, I think you're.
Can you hear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you now.
Yes. Yeah. So at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Borkar sir for inviting me for this prestigious conference. There are great speakers for this, and it is a privilege to attend any conference by Dr. Borkar. So I would like to just highlight few things which I'm sure Dr. Borkar in his presentation would be able to. He'll be able to take a complete analysis of it. However, to begin with, I would like to say that I was born in one small village along the coast of Karna River, which in 1975 to 1985 to 90, it had maximum numbers of muggers in Karna River, which is a sweet water river. And on the other side, we have Shapora River, which is again a sweet water river, meeting Arabian Sea, and before that it becomes completely salty. So it's an estuarine ecosystem. And when these both rivers, today also they have a lot of muggers. So since childhood, we have been associated with muggers. And in our state, if you go to see, we have a situation wherein the number of muggers are rising day by day, whether it is Kumbarzua Canal, whether it is Madkai, whether it is Karamali side, or whether it is even Pedne, whether it is Karna River, or whether it is Shapora River. Almost along these river sides, we are finding that the number of crocodiles is coming up. However, today at the outset, let me greet all of you because today is a World Crocodile Day. And for this beautiful species, when today we see that at some places in Goa, we worship this mugger with Mange Thapani, which was first brought to highlight to the scientific community by Dr. Borkar sir. This was something that is very unique example of coexistence. We have so many sacred groves in the state, but what is more important is worshipping tiger, worshipping mugger. All this starts only when we respect nature immensely. That means our ancestors have coexisted. They have immensely respected this powerful animal, because the moment we see such a powerful creation of nature and being a keystone species, I think it is very important that we conserve because it indicates the healthy ecosystem. When we have presence of mugger in an ecosystem, the food web is healthy, the ecosystem is healthy, the habitats are safe, and we have to actually see whether these habitats are safe or not. But what is important is, being a saltwater species, some of them are accustomed to our state. They are some freshwater species have been residing in even the salt waters in our state. And if you see the broad snouted crocodile or marsh crocodile, the mugger crocodile, which is medium to large size, is there in Goa. We do not have the big alligators which are present elsewhere, but they're very healthy. Whenever we see on the field trip, we find that they're very healthy. And interestingly, recently I was told that even in one of the DG sets of a factory associated with Kumbarzoa Canal, next to Kumbarzoa Canal, one crocodile was nicely sleeping in the DG set. That means so far there have been no major conflicts in the state, even while they are moving openly along the roadsides. In the mangrove ecosystems, they are seen during daytimes. They are very, fearlessly moving around, and daytime you can see them resting nicely on the mud flats and on the in the mangrove ecosystems. There are these big creatures, they are moving, and we have otters, we have fish, we have other species, and they being killed. Keystone, you all know that it's a very important species. We have 2 species in Goa, and there is a threat to them also. The threat is that some prepare oil. When we do people's register, we come to know that yes, the crocodile skin, the scale oil is very good for this particular different type of pain which doesn't get healed. That means it has been also poached for the purpose of oil and other products. For leather, I do not know, in Goa we do not have any cases which are reported for leather, but definitely there is a feeling of fear in some areas. Recently we have been reported, like in Madkai, that there were instances when somebody went near to the mugger and then there was possibility of human animal conflict. But when we inquired, we came to know that it was not that mugger who came to the to the person, but the people go as a part of crocodile safari. We have found that motor boats which go in their habitats, and when they are actually relaxing, going near to them to take photograph, and I'm sure all of you must have experienced this, that even in Gir forest or even in any protected forest ecosystem, we do not respect them. And the same thing is even witnessed in case of muggers, that they are not respected in some. While we worship in one side, as I'm showing you, in some areas like Kumbarzoa, yes, of course, when we asked the biodiversity committee chairperson first time, they were not really aware that in some areas they are worshipped. But as a part of people's register, when people started moving in the entire village, this was discovered that yes, in the past we were doing the puja and now it is not done. But today is a day when we have got the news that yes, it is worshipped in Goa also, especially in Durbhat area. And if you see, they are often associated with mangroves in Goa and in the water bodies. There are areas right from north to south, as I was talking to you. Durbhat comes in the south, whereas Karna River, it comes in the north. And on the Elorna Fort, it was very interesting when PBR was being done. In the night time, they put a light and they could see many eyes around the fort, and they were all crocodiles. So what I wish to say is, as a keynote speaker to this particular conference, I was very happy that this conference has been organized. We have so much biodiversity that sometimes person doing research in wildlife, they only talk about the tiger and the lion and the species which are keystone species in terrestrial forest. But I think this is a great species which deserves to be respected, being an important species in marine ecosystem, the coastal ecosystem, the riverine ecosystem. Not only riparian biodiversity it is ruling, but it's a keynote species even when it comes to estuarine and the transitional ecosystems, where we find that especially the Chapora River coming and meeting the Arabian Sea, even when it meets Mandavi River, sorry, there are sand dunes which are formed, and you can actually find muggers during the flood times and all coming into the farms. This is one finding in some island villages of Goa, that wherever there is flood, whenever there is flood, there are some cattle ponds which are also known as poi in some areas of North Goa. So we have found that crocodiles, along with the flood, they come to the upland areas also. And this is not the place where they normally stay. So then we have found that 2-3 years back, we had to rescue them. One very respected rescuer, Sri Amrut Singh, he rescued many of these muggers. And then during flood is the only time when they go to these higher ups. Otherwise, they do not go to the uplands. They are very much disciplined, confining themselves to these mangrove ecosystems, to the maximum to the pandanus. We have seen them along with some rivulets in the North Goa. But it is very interesting that a researcher like Manoj Borkar sir is putting a lot of his efforts in unrevealing the facts about this great species, and many other researchers whom we'll be talking today, they are focusing. On this day, I would only request that this is a very respected species in Goa, and we need to ensure their habitats, integrity of their habitats, which we find that are under the threat. Today, I would like to say that we have also told our biodiversity committees that whenever proposals of riverside roads come, or whenever any mangrove destruction is planned, do not only think it as a mangrove destruction, it is a destruction of habitat of this respected species. And I think Crocodilus palustris is very much present in the stretches around the Madkai River, Kambarzoa. And there is a proposal with us in the state level steering committee of mangroves that there should be an ecotourism or an agro-ecotourism. But the only threat is many bunds have broken in that area, like Dongzo Khazan, if you see. Almost 130 hectares of land which was under Khazan cultivation is inundated today because the bunds have been breached. So when these bunds are restored, I am sure that the water phase of these areas will be reduced drastically, because then we will be reclaiming again these Khazan lands. And when you have Khazan lands reclaimed, I think per square meter availability of waterscape for this beautiful species will be reduced drastically, and I fear that this may lead to human-animal conflict, and we should not allow this situation to come in Goa, because one side we want to restore our Khazan ecosystems, wherein we want to replace or restore bunds, and by restoring bunds, even in ecosystem-wise way, eco-friendly way, we will find that the reduced space, ecosystem, habitat space for the crocodile will be a problem. So we'll have to have a detailed planning, a thorough planning. We'll have to have a detailed habitat studies, and it would require many people to join hands together. It is not going to be possible with few people doing work on this. So I would urge on this day that many researchers should not confine themselves only to mangrove or only to terrestrial ecosystem, but they should extend their work to the habitats of mugger. And I think it's a very important flagship species for at least 5 to 6 village panchayat when it comes to marine ecosystem and riparian ecosystems. So with that, I would like to stop by urging all of you that please take this subject very seriously. I'm really thankful to Dr. Borkar sir, because this is a job which all of us has to do, whether it is Forest Department, whether it is Coastal Zone Management Authority, Biodiversity Board, and all of us. And I can promise that anything that is required from Biodiversity Board, may it be research funding for this, we would not look back, and we would be able to provide entire support to the people working in this field, and with the request that let us work with the local communities, the biodiversity management committees, let us make them realize the importance of this beautiful species, its habitat. And I think while we talk about conservation of species, it automatically means that we have to protect the habitats. And it is high time that this is recorded in the People's Biodiversity Register so that it gets legitimate protection, and we will be able to protect the niche of this beautiful species. So with that, I thank you for giving me an opportunity, and you can take ahead the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, so much for your wonderful explanation of the situation of the crocodiles and the state of them in our state of Goa, and also for explaining about the importance of the crocodile in the different ecosystems that are there. And I'm sure that by listening to you, I'm sure that many of the researchers here are definitely going to try and incorporate the conservation of crocodiles in their studies as well. And I also thank you for your support from from your side and the Goa State Biodiversity Board for helping us with this webinar, first of all, and also for extending your help in any future endeavors that we and any other researcher may take to protect this magnificent species. Thank you so much, sir. So now we will continue with the technical session of our webinar, and we have with us our first speaker for the technical session, Dr. Utkarsha Chavan, who is a faculty in the Department of Zoology of Bhavan's Hazarimal Somani College of Arts and Science in Mumbai. She is a trained endocrinologist from the Institute of Science, and she has later worked on to field biology. And as a field biologist, she has worked to radio track carpet pythons in Australia and has also studied the bats in abandoned gold mines in the same country. And she has also volunteered in the Madras Crocodile Bank Trust, and she has been monitoring the mugger crocodiles of the Savitri River in Mahad since 2014. She has also been a resource person on the topic of crocodiles on multiple occasions and has worked as an expert adjunct on a project dealing with the human-wildlife conflict in coastal Gujarat. So now I invite Dr. Chavan to shed some light on the human-mugger conflict situation in Savitri River of Mahad, Maharashtra. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, all of you. Shall I present my...
Yes, ma'am, you can present your screen.
Yeah, this is Dr. Utkarsha. Wish you all a very happy World Crocodile Day. I will be sharing my experiences of mugger crocodiles of River Savitri, Mahad, Maharashtra. I would like to make a small request that please, if you have any questions and queries, I will be taking it at the end of the talk. So thank you for that. First of all, let me give a brief account on the Crocodilia, order Crocodilia, which comprises 27 species of crocodilians, 2 species of alligators, 6 species of caimans, 18 species of crocodiles, and 1 species of gharial. Crocodilians generally are found in tropical regions. However, the alligators are found in colder regions of America and China. All the species of caimans are found on American continent. Crocodiles are found on continents, namely the Australia, Africa, America, and Asia. Gharials are found in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Here is a photo montage of caimans and alligators, all the 6 species of caimans and 2 species of alligators. This is a photo montage of the crocodiles of the world. In the first line are the American crocodiles. These up to the Crocodilus sucus are African ones. From New Guinea to Johnstoni are the Australian crocodiles, and the late Tomistoma to Mandarensis are the Asian crocodiles, except India. In India, we have three species of crocodilians. The saltwater crocodile, which is scientifically called as Crocodilus porosus, which is supposed to be the largest living reptile of the world. Then we have mugger crocodile or Indian marsh crocodile, Crocodilus palustris. And the third one is the gharial, Gavialis gangeticus, which has the thinnest of snout. I would like to add over here that mugger crocodile has the broadest snout of all the crocodiles, very similar to that of alligators. So when it comes to crocodilians of India, we have unique crocodilians of the world. This is a distribution map of crocodiles across Indian subcontinent. And earlier in 1970s, I must say that crocodiles number had dwindled near extinction. And at that time, Dr. Romulus Whitaker stepped in and contributed to crocodile conservation. I had a good fortune to understand the nuances of crocodile biology from him. He has kind of mentored me in my understanding of mugger biology. I have also spent some time in Madras crocodile band crust. Indian freshwater crocodile or marsh crocodile, Crocodilus palustris lesson, is recognized as mugger all over the world. Muggers are found in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Iran. They prefer slow-moving waters, but they may also occupy ponds, rivers, and estuarine water. Post-occipital scutes are the signature feature of mugger. And one more feature, which I already told you about, is it has the broadest snout of all the crocodilians. Most of the photographs or the images which I will be presenting in this talk have been taken by me for last 1 decade on River Savitri. Mugger can reach up to 15 feet and their average size is in between 9 to 12 feet. It carries a global IUCN status of vulnerable category listed as CITES Appendix 1 and is also covered under Schedule 1 of Indian Wildlife Protection Act. The reptile is an apex predator and a keystone species of its ecosystem. Now, when I talk about keystone species, a keystone species is the one which, if it is absent, then the lower trophic level species will flourish. And mugger, being an apex predator and also a scavenger, it actually is a keystone species. Why? Because it has multiple functions which it is performing in that particular ecosystem. Now, mugger is a generalist feeder, but preferably it feeds on invertebrates, fish, amphibians, other reptiles, birds, and small mammals, and also scavenges on carrion. It is not a habitual man-eater, and also they are not aggressive as such in nature, but they can be aggressive when provoked. They have the broadest snout of all the crocodilians or crocodiles, which is very similar to that of alligator. I have been studying a resident population of mugger along a stretch of 3.5 kilometers of river Savitri at 4 locations: Kemborli, Mohalla, Dadli, Smashan, on the outskirts of Mahad, which I have been monitoring on a monthly basis since 2014. This is a metapopulation habitat of Magar at River Savitri. Now, a metapopulation consists of a group of specially separated population of the same species which interact at some level. Assessment of Magar conflicts, human Magar conflicts or coexistence scenario at River Savitri. Now, I would like to say over here that conflict and coexistence are two sides of the same coin. It is very difficult for a biologist to label whether it is a conflict or a coexistence. It is sometimes very premature to call it as conflict or coexistence because it is a relationship between the humans and the wildlife, which becomes an integral part of the wildlife habitat. Now, conflict situation only arises when there is very close proximity of that particular wild animal to the communities, and it results in loss of one of them at either side. Either it can be human or the wild animal. My work is more focused on understanding the conflict scenario and then attempting to devise an appropriate mitigatory interventions. A few issues that need to be examined are what exactly is human-wildlife conflict, or in this case, human-Magar conflict? What is the genesis of conflict situation? Appropriate mitigatory interventions? How do we transform the conflict into coexistence? These are the questions which need to be asked. Human-wildlife conflict arises from proximity of human communities with wildlife, leading to competition for common resources, resulting in loss of life on either side, which means human-wildlife conflict does not mean that it is always the humans which are on the receiving end, but it can be wildlife also at a great loss. Again, I am presenting the map of the crocodile habitat of River Savitri. By word interface here, I mean that the space where the crocodiles and humans are come in proximity with each other. Now this particular, from Kimberley to Smashan, the entire 3.5 kilometer stretch is a conflict interface. Savitri River has been a source of water for local indigenous communities in absence of basic civic amenities like regular water supply and sanitation. The river also provides food and cultural space for local indigenous community. The river water offers subsistence fishing to indigenous Kakkaria or Kathodi tribals and Koli who descend into waters for fishing and clam collection, regardless of crocodiles floating around them. The Kakkaris and the Koli are gazetted communities of Maharashtra. The Kakkari especially are so impoverished that they do not even have, they cannot even afford actually to buy the fishing gears. So they actually do makeshift nets, especially from their clothes. They make use of the clothes to make makeshift nets. Here you can see two tribal women who are the Katkari women who have made her sari as a fishing net. Generally, the men will do the finfish fishery and the women collect the clam. Now here in this photograph, it is very much evident that the crocodiles and the fishermen are in very close proximity. Here I would like to show you a video wherein you can understand how close they can be. So I'll just Here, this is a video. These are the kakkaris which are actually fishing, and you can see a huge mugger. It is nearly about 13 feet long, and there are many muggers in water also over here. You will, as the video proceeds, you will understand there are muggers in water, and this lady is in water very near to the crocodile. It's here also there was a crocodile, and there are many crocodiles. The video will stop now, but there are many crocodiles here beneath the trees also. So it's very much that the kakkaris especially, they really descend into the waters when the muggers are also there. I think now this is an iconic photograph, which actually speaks volumes and suggests it is more of coexistence rather than a conflict as of now. The tribals here seem to be at ease when the crocodiles are floating dangerously close to them, perhaps due to keen understanding of the reptiles, and they know how not to elicit any aggression from the reptile. I have been monitoring the crocodiles for a decade, but I started uh, actually population trends since 2014 on a monthly basis till date. And you can see a gradual increase in the crocodile population over the years. Curiously, despite an upward trend in crocodilian population over here, the reptiles seem to have been conditioned to human presence, and they inhabit as long as their private space is not violated. And humans also reciprocate their trust. Now let's talk a little bit about River Savitri, which provides locals the fish, water, and bank for dumping the waste. Not only the local communities dump waste, but the civic authorities also dump the anthropogenic waste and put fire to the heaps of urban waste. The river has a diversity of finfishes and shellfishes and has a very good fishery potential, which has been already documented. Fishing is not commercially exploited here, but it is more towards subsistence. The river is increasingly becoming a sink for anthropogenic wastes emerging from the adjacent settlements, juxtaposing the reptile with humans and human waste, and that might be the cause of the incidence of crocodile mortality, which has increased in recent times. This photograph shows raw sewage being released into the water. And here you can see the urban waste which are dumped at the bank of the river. Okay, it is not only this urban waste, but it is also a lot of offal which has been dumped over here. And because muggers are actually opportunistic feeders, and they scavenge upon carrion. So this offal actually is an incentive for them. And the urban waste can be sometimes toxic, or it is sometimes toxic, and the leachate can actually alter the river's hydrochemistry. Now these photographs give us an idea how much we have exploited or we have taken the river for granted, for that matter. And the river banks are certainly not garbage dumps or dumping grounds, for that matter. We all need to take responsibility towards it. This is one of the major impacts on the river ecology. This riparian habitat is under severe stress. One of my study sites is a cremation ground called as Smashan, where particularly the cremation waste such as the ashes, the bones, and the things which are burnt along with the corpse are actually washed into the river, and this also alters the hydrochemistry of water. Unfortunately, the carcasses are also of livestock are discarded at the banks, and this actually invites the muggers as they are carrion feeders. Regular use of river banks for open air defecation by impoverished local communities in absence of facilities add human waste to this water where the people fish, bathe, and wash. Here you can see a man who is defecating, and here there is a crocodile in close vicinity. Here also a man is defecating, and as earlier I said that the urban waste is put on fire. So this is the civic authority, and the urban waste is being put on fire. Not only the crocodiles tolerate human presence, but also allow animals near them. This photo montage is saying it all. The local communities actually has livestock which is very, very precious to them. And if there is a loss of livestock, then the local community is invariably going to get hostile towards the reptile. And this can cause a conflict scenario. So we have to actually take care of this. I have taken liberty of putting some photographs here. Here you can see during heavy precipitation when a crocodile had come onto the road from Mohalla region. Generally the river river Savitri gets flooded during monsoons, and this is one time where the mugger had crawled on the road. Here you can see the mugger which is smothered by the litter. In fact, it is very difficult to locate a mugger in that litter. And here, due to heavy inundation, the crocodile had to take refuge on the top of the house, rooftop of a house in between Mohalla and Kemborli. This is actually a video snap, and I have taken a screenshot and put over here. Human-mugger conflict situation normally renders on both sides vulnerable to the losses. However, in this study, the muggers of River Savitri at Mahad, presently, the conflict interface seem to be very subtle, and more than people, the reptile is at receiving end as of now. In the recent years, there has been a rise in dead crocodiles from Mohalla to Smashan. Now here, there are crocodiles which are dead on the banks of Savitri. Unfortunately, at this point of time, there is no requisite infrastructure or expertise to do the postmortem. A couple of years back, the authorities, in their own wisdom, just declared that the crocodile had died out of starvation and cremated it. The photographs does not show any signs of starvation. So I'm really very skeptical about this particular sentence about starvation. Here, you can see the croc mortality across ages, age group. This is hatchling. This is 9 feet mugger. This is a 7 feet mugger. So muggers can be across age groups. The muggers are founded. Until now, there have been no reports of loss of human lives or livestock, despite a close proximity with the crocodiles. There is an imminent threat to long-term survival by incremental anthropogenic pressures on this habitat. The greatest threat to the integrity of the habitat is from the land-based garbage, sewage, dumping of carcasses, and loss of basking sites due to human presence and activities. Strategies envisioned to mitigate the human-mugger conflict at Savitri. There is a warning board, I must not say there was a warning board put up which gave a fair idea that muggers are there in the water. However, that particular board is no more existing. I think it got destroyed during one of the floods. The conflict interface having been mapped in this stretch of 3.5 kilometers of River Savitri, safeguards must be put in place to mitigate the conflicts and must include the following: proactive sensitization of the local community. Signages must be put at strategic sites, highlighting the protected status of the crocodiles under Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972, keeping areas with high density of crocodiles inviolate and upgraded as community conserved area. Natural area tourism must be encouraged with a focus on riparian bird trails and crocodile safaris. Importantly, awareness through print, electronic, and social media should be conducted. Long-term spatio-temporal monitoring should be done. A small quick response team to be stationed at convenient location for exigent situation of conflict. Currently, a local NGO CSCAP responds to rescue tasks. Conclusion, this is a viable mugger population at River Savitri Mahad. Mugger habitat in some location is under severe anthropogenic pressures and there is a visible habitat deterioration. The reptilian population trend suggests an increase and likely spillover in days to come, accentuating the human-mugger conflict potential. Timely interventions, as I said earlier, shall be a win-win situation for both men and mugger. The state and the community must synergize their efforts to secure conservation future for crocodile here while encouraging and incentivizing the community involvement. I owe my consistency and enthusiasm for my field work to my ever-willing and curious students. Not to forget my daughter Khushbu, who is always a great source of company and assistance in field. And lastly, I would like to say, Dekho Magar, pyar se. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, so much for your wonderful talk about the situation of the mugger crocodile in Mahad. And I'm sure that many of us who were here may have had this misconception that crocodiles are man-eaters and they're aggressive. But I'm sure that by looking at the evidences that you've presented of your photographs, that we can be sure that there is no such issue. And we know that the only time any animal would react negatively is if there is some provocation on the part of the human beings. And I'm also thank you for shedding light on the plight of this creature, because there are a lot of problems, as we can see in the situation in the Savitri River at the moment. We have a few questions for you, ma'am. So we have a question from Nishad Venugopal. He has said that as per what he knew, that muggers would only survive in fresh waters. So if they are present in estuaries, can they survive both in fresh and salt water? That is his question.
Muggers can survive to some extent in salt water also. Forget about estuaries. They can also can survive in salt water, although not very with high concentration of salt. But yes, they can. Estuaries, yes, they are found in estuaries for sure.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Miss Ria Lopez, and her question is, are there any behavioral adaptations that fishermen use to avoid crocodiles when they are fishing or catching?
Behavioral adaptation, more than behavioral adaptation, actually speaking, it is always observed that when the people, the Kakari people, let me tell you one thing, the muggers are excellent in identifying people. They understand, they can recognize people very well. So, and they definitely understand if the person is new in that area or the person has, he is been frequently visiting that area. So when the Katkaris, they descend down in the river, the muggers actually, they do not do anything. They, the people do not have any, what I should say, special behavioral adaptation. No, they don't have. Only the fishermen, Koli community, who actually put the nets in water, they kind of to just because the mugger should not get caught in their nets, they just what I should say, shake the water vigorously before entering into the water, so that if there is a mugger, it will understand, it will get a cue that now it has to go, and let the fishermen put the nets. So that's all they do.
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question by Swagat Thorat. Have you cited Susars at Savitri? I think maybe it's a Gharial. I'm not sure exactly.
I beg your pardon, come up again.
Ma'am, the question from Swagat Thorat. Have you cited Susars at Savitri, the river, Savitri River?
Have I? Susar, no. No, Susar are only found in northern India. As I said, they are found in India, but northern India, especially Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Nepal, and Bangladesh. So they are found in northern India. Susar, in Maharashtra, as such, only mugger is found, not even porosus. We only have one species, which is Crocodilus palustris, mugger.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. I think we have quite a few questions, but I'll just ask one last question, and I maybe will revert back to you with the other questions through email, that we can sort out any doubts. So the question is it true that crocodiles were brought to Goa by the Portuguese from their colonies in Africa?
This question, I would like Manoj sir to answer, because about Goa, I really don't have that much idea, but I don't think so. They were brought by, I think, some Adil Shah or some that kind of leader. Definitely not by Portuguese.
Okay. Thank you so much. If there are any, the request to the participants, if there are any other questions for Dr. Chavan, you could put it up in the chat box mentioning it is that it is for her, and we will revert back to you later. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation and showing us and telling us about the plight of these animals. And I'm sure that we would all make efforts maybe as much as we can to try and reduce any of these ill effects that we see in the habitats of crocodiles. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So now we'll move on to our next speaker for the day. So whenever we talk about environmental conservation, conservation issues, on wildlife issues, we picture scientists and researchers talking about the importance of the animals. But now there is a new view of conservation biology, which is gaining traction, which is about integrating and coexisting with wildlife in urban habitats. So to talk about this, we have with us architect Karina Kocheri. Ms. Kocheri has studied and worked for the last 14 years across India and the Netherlands. She is an architect specializing in landscape architecture and cultural geography, with degrees from the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda and the Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. Currently, she is part of an urban planning collective called as URBS, which is based in Mumbai and Goa. And since 2014, she has been a part of a citizens group which initiated and demanded the integrated holistic planning and development of the Vishwamitri River in Vadodara. So she, through her work, she aims to reimagine the urban development process and provide a new perspective to conservation efforts. So I invite architect Karina Kocheri to present her views on coexisting with urban crocodiles, lessons from Vishwamitri River, Gujarat. Over to you, Ms. Kocheri.
Good afternoon, everyone. And like you said, Karen, everyone must be wondering what is an architect doing, amidst this crowd. But I'm actually really happy that today is the day that we join hands on World Crocodile Day, and look at ways forward and help reimagine what those ways could be like. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a moment. Let me know once you can see it.
Yes, the screen is visible now.
Is that visible?
It's visible. It's visible.
All right.
Could you maybe go on a full screen mode if it's possible?
Yeah, I just did that. It should load in about a second or two.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think we can go ahead.
All right. So I wanted to start with this, image of the classic human-wildlife conflict that we have in India, which is thought to be more in rural areas. However, we do have animals inhabiting urban areas as well. Like these are the leopards of Mumbai. These are the crocodiles of Powai Lake. This one has met with an ill fate. And here we have the river Vishwamitri, the urban segment in blue, flowing through Vadodara city for a length of around 25 kilometers.
Excuse me, and the slides don't seem to be changing, ma'am. Could you just maybe click on?
Yeah, sure. Let me just restart. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and this time I'll just try not to go into full screen mode. I hope that's okay.
Okay, I think, ma'am, could you just try changing one or two slides?
Okay, do you see the first one with the elephants and people?
Yes. Could you just change to the next one?
Yeah, do you see it?
Yeah, okay. Yes, I think maybe you could go for that.
Yeah, button. I think I'll stay at this mode. I won't go into full screen because that might be problematic. So like I was saying, you have, animals inhabiting urban areas as well. This is a leopard in Bombay, crocodiles in Powai Lake in Bombay as well. And here we have the Vishwamitri River flowing through Baroda city or Vadodara. And just to give you a sense of scale, I outlined, the area of Panjim for the people in Goa, maybe to get a picture of the area that we're speaking of, which is Baroda city. And now here we have this river flowing through the city, and it is a typical urban river landscape, which is kind of degenerated. There's a lot of pollution as well. And if you look closely, you will see that there are also these muggers, along the bank. And there are quite a few of them. There's one here, one there, and one more here. So for me, this presented a really exciting challenge and opportunity as a landscape architect to understand, how can we negotiate our urban landscapes and our cities to, make place for animals that are already actually cohabiting with us. Hence, my thesis was titled Crocodilia urbanis, coexisting with urban wildlife. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the discipline of landscape architecture, we actually deal with the built environment where we have human nature relations or interactions. So it's actually fundamentally a very transdisciplinary field. And specifically for this thesis, I had to rely on insights from animal geography, ethology, which is the study of animal behavior, and also applied ecology, and to kind of create a framework for what I call zoomorphic urban design. So to understand the urban system, it's also important to understand the historic system as well as the present ecosystem. So historically, the Vishwamitri River also, the larger watershed had a lot of ponds, numerous ponds, which were also a part of crocodile habitat. And of course, as the city grew and was urbanized, many of these ponds were erased. And there were many other repercussions of this urbanization. And when the city floods, what we see is, when the river floods, what we see is crocodiles on the streets of the city, crocodiles in people's homes as well. So there are a lot of trouble, that the animal faces, including the floods, fragmentation, and pollution. But despite all of this, one question nobody can answer is why the Vishwamitri River has so many crocodiles. So in order to study this, I mapped the river, the crocodile population in the river. So each dot over here represents an individual crocodile, and in red you see crocodile nests. So as you can see, like the river is around 25 kilometers long through the city. So there are around 25 crocodiles, per kilometer. So there were many approaches, in around 2014, there was a Vishwamitri Riverfront Development Project, which was proposed. And as a part of that proposal, the idea of dealing with the crocodiles was to evacuate them from the river and put them in, a crocodile park. So you're essentially you're taking animals who are free and making them captive animals. And in contraposition to this is the view that, there has to be a rewilding of the crocodile population. But in my opinion, even a rewilding, if we had to kind of calculate the home range for each crocodile, there's a vast amount of area that we need to do this. And it might not be feasible in an urban environment. So I was wondering, can we really call these crocodiles, completely wild, because they have been living in this urban environment for many, many years. So I came upon this work titled Zoopolis by Donaldson and Kimlicka, who are animal geographers. And they propose an interesting political theory of animal rights. So they talk about sovereignty for wild animals, denizanship for liminal animals, and citizenship for domestic animals. So what do you mean by liminal animals? So how they define it is animals that live in human dominated areas, but at the same time, these are not completely dependent on humans for survival. So unlike domestic animals. So I thought this was something, I had to pay attention to while considering the case of the crocodiles of the Vishwamitri. So the objective of my thesis was denizenship status for urban crocodile populations. And what does that mean? So according to Zoopolis, this means securing residency for the animal, so safe shelter, and fair terms of reciprocity, where you will share mutual benefits and risks, and the animal retains its liberty and autonomy. So then, because, I am into the field of design, like the design question was, which urban landscape design interventions can facilitate denizenship for the crocodile in a culturally and ecologically sensitive way? So when we think about wildlife in cities, mentioning it this way as wildlife in cities, it almost feels as if wildlife has been, airdropped into the city, but that's really not the case. There is a process actually of urbanization, which also includes the urbanization of wildlife. So, what are the problems that these crocodiles are facing? One of them, of course, is the fragmentation of routes from the river to the pond network that I'd shown you earlier, which has almost been erased. There are a lot of disturbances due to traffic and construction activities. There's also a concretization happening of the river banks and a lot of dumping of construction debris, like Utkarsha ma'am showed in her presentation. And now this is very problematic also for an animal that has considerable subterrestrial agency. So how are the crocodiles really, adapting to all of these anthropogenic factors? So in my studies, I found out that one, there was surprisingly a higher density of crocodile population. There are changes in their migratory behavior. There's changes also in their breeding ecology. Interestingly, because urban areas tend to have warmer microclimates. Crocodile hatchlings, the sex is determined due to climate. Any of you maybe who are experts on this could correct me if I'm wrong. But because of this, there are more females being born in the urban stretch of the Vishwamitri. They've also shown considerable, adaptiveness towards humans being around. And there's also changes in their diet. So this I found very significant because as you can see in this image, there is a lot of offal being dumped into the river. And this has been happening, as a way for butchers to, deal with meat waste, and now has turned into almost like a feeding ritual. So you have these meat shop owners who come to the bridge every evening and dump the waste, and the crocodiles know about this. And this has kind of, changed them from more of like being predators and turned them into scavengers. They depend more on scavenging. And like Utkarsha ma'am said, they're generalists, so they have a very diverse diet. So just to, check, I thought, let me map the meat vending districts in Baroda and also the feeding sites, which are these red dots. And here is it against the crocodile population. I'm not saying there's a causal link, but it is correlational because you see a high density of crocodile population here. So all of these factors, the higher density of population, changes in breeding ecology, adaptiveness to man. I stumbled upon this theory from applied ecology called synerbization, which is basically these kind of adaptive behaviors that animals show once they've lived in urban areas for really long. So I found that this term, synerbization, is quite interesting, to understand the animal-human dynamics in cities. So I found that the urban crocodiles were very different from their rural counterparts that inhabited the larger Vishwamitri watershed. They of course had a more limited diet, but then that was substantiated by the feeding. And they proved to be more shy than their rural counterparts, and they displayed less aggressive behavior. So I was thinking about, how we can go forward with the design of this riverine landscape and keep the crocodile at the center of this. So how can the crocodile actually help the urban environment to kind of come full circle with many of these, circular systems like the food cycle. So you have offal as a byproduct. There's a water cycle, which has sewage and storm water as something that all Indian cities need to be able to deal with. And you have the urban construction cycle that generates a considerable amount of building debris. So how do we take this forward is the question. So here is something that I call a novel urban ecosystem, where we understand the seasonal dynamics of the landscape, which is shared and cohabited with the crocodile. And if you remember, the design question was, which landscape design interventions could really, achieve this denizanship status for the crocodile. So one of them is having feeding sites, which are strategically placed along the river, and we organize this system of meat waste disposal. The second is to have constructed wetlands, which are basically man-made wetland habitat, to kind of, compensate for the loss of the pond network in the city, and also to provide habitat for crocodiles during the monsoons, because they don't really prefer fast-flowing waters. They areas. And these mounds could actually also, provide refuge for crocodiles during the monsoon season. Because the main reason why crocodiles are found on the roads and also in people's houses is because they are actually seeking dry land for basking. As we all know that crocodiles are ectothermic. So they really need to be able to find dry land to bask and to regulate their body temperature and metabolism. And the fourth intervention would be dikes, which you could think of as, much larger bunds that, protect low-lying settlements along the river, and also again provide secondary refuge for the crocodile. So of course you would have to study the topography of the riverine landscape to strategically place these mounds, levees, and constructed wetlands in areas that are naturally conducive for these structures. So I'm going to run you through a few design guidelines that I came up with for each of these interventions. I won't go through all of them, but I will show you, just run you through a few. So for example, crocodiles feed on the edge of water. So these feeding sites, as I imagine them to be, something like this, would have to be wide enough to accommodate the changing, water line through the seasons. Another important factor to consider is that crocodiles, they feed at night. So while there should be adequate lighting on these feeding platforms for human safety, it should not interfere with crocodilian behavior. So similarly for the constructed wetlands, we can regulate the depth of these wetlands, where you have shallower areas, not more than 1 meter, to allow the crocodiles to be comfortable. And we also have deeper areas that, retain excess stormwater discharge during the monsoon. So every intervention is benefiting both the crocodile and the human population. Also in terms of, planting around the constructed wetlands. it's important that if, humans have access to some part of this wetland, the planting is done in a way that there's enough, there isn't a lot of shrubbery around, so that, you can see if there's a crocodile in the area and retreat if necessary. So you're not kind of, there's no question of being attacked by surprise, not that these crocodiles are very aggressive anyway. So these are a few examples. And also regarding the mounds, I felt that, they need to be used again, both by humans and crocodiles. So how do you do that? So I felt that these mounds should, have a dual slope. So in the non-monsoon season, this slope is prohibitive for crocodiles. So they really can't access the mounds. And then as the floodwaters rise, they are able now to access the mounds because of a slightly gentler slope, which allows them to do that. We would also place these mounds away from human settlements so that, there's no opportunity for conflict. And also, of course, we calculate, the crocodile population and how much of dry mound area we would need per river segment in case of, very high flood, and to accommodate, all the crocodiles that would need to bask. And for the dikes as well, the dikes can serve a purpose of, if there's enough space to protect the human settlement, and also have a terrace or a promenade, and at the lower level have refuge for the crocodile. So this diagram is actually very, it's very telling, and it kind of lays out the choreography of humans and crocodiles in the city and how they can, cohabit. So in the summer months, the riparian habitat is actually quite safe for human use because it's very, very hot in Vadodara. Temperatures go up to 40 degrees, sometimes even beyond that. And crocodiles, like I mentioned earlier, are ectothermic. So they need to estivate, and they are in their dens or in these constructed wetlands. So the mounds and the riparian habitat become very safe for human use. Come the monsoon, the river tends to flood, and crocodiles do not like this fast flowing deep water. So again, they can retreat to the constructed wetlands and the mounds if needed. And come the winter, humans would have to, maybe stay away a little bit from the crocodile habitat because it is their mating season and they tend to display a little more aggression. And but the mounds, of course, can be accessible to humans during this time. So I tested these, guidelines on 3 sites. I'm just going to show you one as an example. So this is the site in the northern part of the river, where we have the Vishwamitri flowing through here, and we have this settlement, a low-lying settlement, and crocodile rescue organizations, especially from this area, saying that hey, there's there are a bunch of crocodiles in the complex. So I decided to pay attention to this, and here's what I proposed. We could have a constructed wetland here, and also place these mounds on the depositing edge of the river. This is considering hydrological and factors, and also have a series of dikes to not only protect this settlement, but also, like I mentioned earlier, to allow for the crocodiles to seek refuge in a high flood situation. And this actually over here is an existing lake. It's one of the larger lakes, so it still survives. And I think it would be crucial to maybe even connect, the lake, reconnect or restore the connection of this lake to the river. This is, just a very basic rendering of what the dike could look like along the settlement and by the river. And then I made a few collages just to not represent exactly the situation, but just to give like an artistic, angle to what this could be. So for example, if this is the dike with this more organic riparian edge for the crocodile, this is a mound, and behind here would be the human settlement. And this is in the non-monsoon. And then, you know, in the monsoon, as the water levels rise, crocodiles could, you know, seek refuge here. And I would just like to show you, you know, a rendering of one of these feeding sites and what I imagined it to be like, where, you know, humans have access to the crocodile, both in terms of being able to feed them and also in terms of being able to be onlookers to this, you know, ritual of sorts. And yeah, and in the background, you see another mound and a dike to protect human settlements. So yeah, this is basically you know, the end of my presentation. And just to conclude, I would like to pose these questions because I'm not from the wildlife community, but I really believe that it's important to you know, take stock of this phenomenon of synergization and not see the animal as being just wild or just domesticated, because it is it's really not the case. And we need to take this into account when we are proposing any kind of interventions in these landscapes, maybe for ecotourism or anything of the sort. And also it is possible, and hopefully I've shown this through the design, it is possible to design solutions for shared habitat between humans and crocodiles. And this practicality of Schedule 1 status for wild animals in Indian cities, I think, is questionable. Maybe we can even accord denizenship status instead, you know. Because when I've spoken to a lot of people in Baroda city, especially forest rangers and wildlife conservationists, their opinion was that as soon as you turn it into some kind of a protected sanctuary, there's a lot of other illegal activities that happen there. You know, for one is, for example, the brewing of hooch or illegal alcohol, or dumping of waste, because you can't really monitor what's going on. So it's better to be proud of this human-animal correlation and be not as protectionist, but try to be more integrative. And finally, one really interesting remark that I want to make is about predator species in urban areas. And what I noticed was, if you, any of you, you know, you can go on Google Earth and check out human settlements in urban areas along rivers, urban rivers. And they are literally coming up right to the edge of the river, you know, and you'll see like one pipe from the house letting out sewage directly into the river. But in the case of Baroda, this did not happen. So there was always like an 8 to 15 meter buffer, vegetated buffer along the river. And I think this is mainly because the residents of Baroda are aware. And I'm talking about the informal settlers. They are very aware of you know, what it means to cohabit this riparian landscape with a predator species. And I feel that, you know, the crocodile has almost done the job of policing and protecting urban green-blue infrastructure in Baroda. So that's it from me. Thanks a lot for listening. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or maybe at the end of the talk. Karen, or whichever you prefer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Kochi. It was a very informative session, because I'm sure none of us have really thought about you know, incorporating architectural landscaping into our talks and our discussions about you know, conservation aspect of wildlife. And going through the chat box, there has been you know, quite a lot of questions. I think a lot of us are worried mostly about safety. So there is a question from Dr. Manoj Borkar, and I think it reflects most of what people are asking, or the main concern is whether the planning intervention includes safety as a core component, and maybe what are the issues that we may face in terms of safety in conflicts, maybe if they may arise?
Yeah, so like I said, safety is definitely a core concern here. I don't know, can I present my screen again? Like maybe I could show
Yeah, sure,
you.
sure.
Yeah, so and safety, like, again, going back to even Dr. Utkarsha's presentation, oftentimes it's actually the crocodile that needs protection and not humans, especially in human dominated landscapes like this. In fact, in the past 15 years in Baroda, there have just been 19 incidences, and very minor incidences, and most of them have been actually the crocodiles being attacked by humans. So I would say safety is definitely important, and both for crocodiles and for humans. Now, along with safety, as a landscape architect, you also think of, how you can use the existing landscape and how there should also be an awareness of this resident crocodile population. Almost like a manual to be able to negotiate this landscape. So awareness is definitely a huge factor that contributes to safeguarding yourself. And apart from that, like I said, these mounts, for example, in every intervention, safety is definitely considered. So like the design of these mounds, they kind of, the slope in the dry season is absolutely prohibitive for crocodiles to be able to access it, and also the planting on these mounds, like I showed earlier, it's very important to where, if there's human access to these areas, it is very important to ensure that the planting is done in a way that you are not creating conditions for conflict. You're ensuring that there is, enough space for someone to be able to sight the crocodile. So hence you only plant taller trees and, very basic ground cover, nothing that can like hide a full grown crocodile and take you by surprise. So there are many ways, and even like these feeding platforms, it's not like you are down on the edge of the river feeding these animals, but you are on a raised platform which keeps you pretty safe. And like I said, it's really important to not only imagine safety as something for, but also for crocodiles. And it's also up to us. The onus is on us to really increase our eco-literacy and be aware of these kind of creatures that really cohabit so closely in the same landscape as us. And at the same time, like if safety becomes such a huge concern, then you just end up having you just end up fencing in the crocodiles, or creating barriers that really, I think, sort of subvert this relationship, of humans and crocodiles. And like even Dr. Utkarsha presented, crocodiles, have an extremely high emotional quotient and intelligence. They can recognize people. They immediately know when the fishermen, kind of disturb the water a bit. So it's a cue for them to move away. And it's understandable that people are afraid of these animals because they've also been vilified and portrayed in a certain way. So it's like a it's an all-round approach, for all of us to learn to live with these really amazing and fascinating creatures, and also to not be afraid, of them. And like, for example, when I saw a crocodile for the first time in the river Vishwamitri, it was just such a special encounter because it was not in a zoo, it was really in just in its natural habitat. And I had the privilege of seeing this animal in its natural habitat in a city. And I think there's something to gain from this experience as well. So I hope that answers your concerns.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know that a lot of people have safety concerns, but as you said, it's not just about the crocodiles. We also have to take a bit of responsibility on ourselves as well. And I'm sure your talk that you have given today has opened up a lot of ideas for deliberation for not only us as individuals, but even the other stakeholders involved in conservation efforts. Thank you so much. Ma'am, there's another question. Whether the designs which you have proposed, would they impact any other riverine activities like maybe fishing or something like that? Would there be any effects there?
No, not really. And to be honest, there isn't much fishing happening in the urban stretch. So it's in further downstream or upstream in the rural areas. So no, it would not impact fishing activities.
Okay. And ma'am, another question by Dr. Nitin Sawant. He has mentioned that you have collected a lot of data. So he wants to know if there was any specific method that you have used to count those crocodiles, or is it a secondary data that you have obtained from somewhere else?
Yeah, it's a secondary data from Dr. Raju Vyas, who's based in Baroda. And he has done a tremendous amount of research on the crocodilian population. And he was one of the people I interviewed for this project. So yeah, it's secondary data, but the map is something that I generated, to show it, to kind of visualize this data in a better way.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. And I think we should move on, but if there are any more questions that the participants may have, I can forward them to you later. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Yes. So now we move on to the last speaker that we have for today, and we have with us Dr. Manoj Borkar. He is the associate professor and head of department for the Department of Zoology, Carmel College for Women, Goa. In his tenure in academia for over 33 years, he has done extensive research in many areas, such as including wildlife and conservation as well. He has served as on the State Biodiversity Board, the Wildlife Board, and the SEAC Goa, and he has done pioneering research on crocodiles of Goa and documented the ecotheological approach to conservation of crocodiles. And he has also participated in the World Crocodile Conference and IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group meeting at Sri Lanka, and has brought the attention of the world to the conservation of crocodiles and the importance of crocodile and the human interaction with them in Goa. So I now invite Dr. Borkar to speak about the conservation ethos of indigenous communities, a case study of crocodiles of the Kumbarzoa Canal, Goa. Over to you, Dr. Manoj Borkar.
Thank you so much, Karen. I believe I'm audible to everybody. First of all, please accept my gratitude for an overwhelming response to all of you who've chosen to log in this regional webinar. It's very encouraging to see everybody here. I think it's cross-sectional stakeholders that we are addressing today, and we feel vindicated for organizing this event. And after the first two speakers, rather very erudite speakers and people well known in their domains of expertise, I seek to take you away from hardcore science into a domain of faith and cult. So to say, a quick trip into the world of cultural anthropology with a specific focus on the role of indigenous communities and the way they celebrate their folk religion, replete with reference to the crocodile. And though my theme is more to do with the indigenous communities of Goa, particularly the Hindu Gauda community of Goa, I would touch upon not only indigenous communities from the Asian continent, but also probably kind of touch and go with a little information from Africa and Australia and so on and so forth. So to start with, once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. Since I have convened this event, I express my gratitude. It's been exciting to have all of you here. And probably this is the first time we attempted to, we were toying with the idea of a transdisciplinary approach. I certainly appreciate and understand your discomfort with, probably straying away from the core concepts of wildlife biology and getting into urban planning and proximity with wildlife. And of course, all the concerns raised by people who've been listening to the speakers are extremely valid and genuine. I mean, particularly with the current pandemic of COVID-19, which we all know is likely to have been a zoonotic spillover from, again, a wild species of horseshoe bat. These concerns are extremely, they're valid and reasonable. As I say, to take you from, the domain of wildlife biology to understanding the role of indigenous communities. In my first slide, of course, what you see on the left is an age-old image that I would have taken way back in the 90s in the, the Kumbarza Canal fringe, the riparian habitat. As the keynote speaker, Dr. Pradeep Sarmokadam, has kind of put in a nutshell the whole story about the crocodiles of Goa. I think Kumbarza Canal, which has a very rich fringe of mangrove vegetation, probably the richest concentration of mangroves in the state of Goa, in the confluence between the river Mandu and Zuari. Of course, I need to also caution you, the word river is a misnomer. We know Mandu and Zuari, as it flows and meanders through the state, is more of an estuary. And that's again to kind of quickly respond to somebody who asked this question on whether this species of crocodile, Crocodilus palustris, can adapt to seawater. And to a certain extent, the answer would be yes. And in particular, Crocodilus palustris, though classically called as the freshwater crocodile or the mugger, is known to show a reasonable scale of tolerance to salinity. I mean, in Goa, of course, it has got very well adapted to the estuarine waters of the Kumbarza Canal. And that's where the metapopulation is. And the image on the right, if you could see, is a kind of a replica, which of course I'm going to talk to you about this a little later in greater details, but that's off the cuff, let me tell you. This is what the indigenous communities of Goa celebrate, a sort of a replica of the crocodile crafted out of silt, picked from waterlogged paddy fields, and locally this is known as Mange Tapni. I've had the good fortune of being able to demystify this seemingly primitive folk religious response way back in the 90s. And from then onwards, of course, this has been celebrated both by the local communities and the scientific community. I'm very happy to share with you that maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, in one of the, the Society for Conservation Biology European Congress, I was invited to speak about the role of indigenous communities in the conservation of crocodiles. So a kind of, I'm sorry, apologies. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So, I mean, I have to be starting this presentation by underpinning the fact that the crocodiles have been a kind of indispensable, in the sense, indivisible part of Goa's ecology, history, culture, anthropology. That also includes, of course, the religion. You find multiple instances where this reptile has been integrated in the local folklore, a number of cultural relics by way of, figurines and drawings and folk tales and so on and so forth. I mean, that kind of confirms the place of prominence that the crocodile holds in Goa's socio-ecology, and maybe it has a great historical relevance in the state's ethos, to say, the community ethos. Just a kind of a quick run through a little bit of biology of the species. The Crocodilus palustris is a red-listed species. It probably has a vulnerable status as a conservation concerned species by the IUCN. The last assessment that was done in Negumbo in Sri Lanka, I was fortunate to have been a part of that. Of course, there were others from the state of Goa. Shri Nirmal Kulkarni was also a very well-known figure in the state of Goa who's been into herpetology for quite some time. He was, of course, a party to this assessment in Sri Lanka. Nationally, of course, the animal figures in the Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972 Schedule 1, which invites the highest possible conservation focus and attention. Unfortunately, the population has not been, very formally and rigorously monitored or censused in Goa per se by the state authorities. And the only documented scientific assessment in terms of enumeration of the crocodile was done by our team way back in the 90s, which of course is a little obsolete now. I mean, we need to now take a fresh look and revisit the whole place. Now, this is very interesting, but from the number of crocodiles straying into human habitations, the number of rescue calls that the Goa State Forest Department receives, the trend is very obvious and the population is surely increasing locally. In fact, one reason that I thought we should talk about this today in terms of the violation of carrying capacity, the metapopulation habitat is actually leading to a spillover. And we all accept in the scientific fraternity that spillover is a prequel to the sequel, which is a human-mugger conflict. I mean, you have a conflict situation when the animals move out of their metapopulation habitat to a spillover and start establishing probably satellite populations in the vicinity and proximity of human settlements. The habitat, of course, varies from freshwaters to estuarine waters. Prefer, slow flowing water bodies, ideally stagnant. Something very interesting is Goa has been on the forefront of being able to very sustainably look at this precious species, which our member secretary, Goa State Biodiversity Board also was very categoric in stating that we now need to look at the crocodile more in terms of a community resource and attempt to use this in generating livelihood for the local communities. And I'm very glad to share with you that until recently, we had as many as, the number could certainly have changed by now, but we had as many as 7 commercial ventures. I mean, the so-called crocodile safaris and numerous, absolutely. A lot of these young boys and men from the entire catchment of the Kumbarzua in some way or the other benefit from the presence of crocodile. A lot of people seek, I mean, who visit Goa now, we all know Goa is more known to the world as a land of sun, sand, and sea. But now we emphasize here, and I guess this is the right forum to convey this message that in Goa, we have much more than the sun, sand, and sea in our Sahyadris, in our backwaters, and we've got a lot of these ecotourism options too. And crocodile most certainly is one of the many options towards ecotourism or soft tourism or sustainable tourism. So I just thought I would put a kind of a small, ad which appears in the cyberspace in crocodile safaris, coupled with bird watching, where they take you in a small country-made boat. Sometimes they also fit with, an engine so that they can take a slightly bigger capacity. The fear now, of course, is that this venture is to a large extent unregulated, does not have any kind of I would say, a visitor carrying capacity has not been looked at in terms of the conduct of these crocodile safaris. So between 1993, I mean, you can see that those were the days when I was kind of very, pretty active and a lot of enthusiasm and energy in the field. And that's me interacting with the local, member of the local community, who in fact, I would say, I mean, this man who's no more, of course, taught me a lot of basics in my understanding of the crocodile. I would not hesitate to give him the position of being my first guru towards understanding the field biology of crocodiles. And then the man on the image in the center with whom I am sitting in that conference at the World Crocodile event is Dr. Anselm de Silva, who's of course a very reputed Sinhalese crocodile biologist. And to take the story further, let me quickly familiarize you with the main stressors on the crocodilian habitat. So as I've said, and let me repeat and reiterate, the most important habitat for the crocodile in the state of Goa is the mangrove ecosystem in the backwaters of the Kumbarzua Canal. I mean, you start right from the famous Sharao Dr. Salim Ali Bird Sanctuary, And then you move further down Banastari, and those of you who are family, I'm going to show you a little later a Google image of the whole landscape. But if I am to kind of, sort of list them out in terms of stressors on the ecosystem or ecology of the mugger in Goa, I think these are some of the important, pressures, or so to say, drivers of the habitat degradation. On top of this, of course, a lot of sand extraction happening from the sediments of the adjacent rivers, which can alter the hydrodynamics and sedimentology, which could very well affect the basking sites of the crocodile. You can see in figure 1 and 2, you find the whole stream of the water, kind of crowded with a lot of this sand extraction canoes and a lot of migrant labor who are deployed to, extract, or rather over-extract would be a more appropriate way of looking at it. At number 3, of course, is something which is not happening at the moment. A lot of traffic of the barges carrying iron ore from the site of, I would say, loading to the Marmugao harbor, from where the iron ore would probably be transshipped to any other destination or port of call. So whilst these barges would navigate, I mean, Kumbarzua is a navigable water channel. So when you have this kind of, a navigable density with a lot of these barges traveling through the canal, during our study and even subsequently, a lot of these crocodiles have found, unfortunately decimated by the propellers of these marine vessels. And most certainly the movement of the vessel, kind of stirs the entire water body, disturbing the crocodiles, especially at the basking sites. And you do also have a lot of the shipyards or, barge fabrication units, a lot of these industrial effluents, inadvertently gets washed into the water, altering its hydrochemistry. A lot of this could be detrimental to the integrity of crocodile habitats. At number 5, you could see a lot of tourists, domestic foreigners, and a lot of them who have a slight inclination and leaning towards the more responsible, tourism, where the focus is not so much on comfort, and I would say it's more to do with experience and education and contributing in a small way to the local economy, which of course are the hallmarks of ecotourism. At number 6, you can see the local fishing gears, futani or kutani. Sometimes the crocodiles, especially the hatchlings or rather the young ones, get trapped in this. And out of sheer panic and some kind of knee-jerk impulse, they also get killed out of a sheer fright. All said and done, there is an innate fear towards the reptile, which is insidious to the human psyche, and that's pretty detrimental to the conservation of these reptiles. And I've just listed a few points. The canal is, is under severe, it's reeling under a lot of land-based terrigenous wastes. It's definitely polluted. There's a significant shrinkage of mangrove habitat. Very unfortunately, we've got critical gaps in understanding of population dynamics. There hasn't been any regular monitoring of the population happening, neither at the statutory level, nor from the academia and research. Of course, a few passionate individuals freelancing, and looking at the conservation future of the crocodile definitely attempt to address this. Most importantly, there is a lot of acculturation, which essentially means an important place of prominence, as I said, which is in the cultural ethos of indigenous communities. And I say this with a lot of conviction that from much of our practice of wildlife biology, I think sociology is slowly skipping out. We must understand and accept that people are an integral part of the habitat of the wildlife that they share the space with. So, unless we agree to the principle of coexistence, conflict would be inevitable. I mean, it's bound to happen. And that's the whole challenge. So I think an animal-friendly ethos like the crocodile worship, and which is what I'm actually going to run you through quickly from different parts of the world, is slowly getting, I would say, it's being questioned. It's kind of getting dilute. It's not being adhered to, and this is definitely an important area of concern. I want to quickly remind you, we've all grown up in India hearing the Panchatantra stories and the Aesopniti or Aesop's fables, where I think, as Karina, my colleague and the previous speaker, has rightly pointed out, there's been a lot of vilification or demonizing the crocodile. I've just got a few cases in point. At number one, you remember the famous story. I mean, all of us probably would have heard about this, and how the crocodile attempted, the nasty crocodile attempted to trick that poor monkey, and halfway through wanted to, taste his heart. The monkey was eventually smart enough to trick the crocodile. But look at the kind of expression which projects and depicts the crocodile in a very nasty kind of frame. At number two, you have many of you who follow the Christian faith may be aware that the Bible talks about a fiery serpent with a coat of nails, which is supposed to spit fire. And that's projected in the Bible as a creature called Leviathan. Now, again, that's something extremely negative. So all the, kind of God-fearing people would have this tendency to look at the crocodile as something extremely terrible. A fire-spitting serpent with a coat of nails called Leviathan is certainly not going to make you look very compassionately towards this reptile. And then at number four, of course, something very positive, the holy Ganges, the Ganga, which is a river which is, the holiest of all. I mean, that's something that we need to take with a pinch of salt. Now, in the present times, we know Ganges is probably very unfortunately, though, despite all the cultural glorification, one of the most polluted riverine ecosystems in the world. But if you look at the mythology, the Ganges is supposed to be having a crocodile as its Vahan or as its mount. In Hindu mythology, a lot of deities are associated with animals, which goes into extending that divinity to that mount or the Vahan, which translates, I presume, and I argue, and I hypothesize that this kind of a belief system evokes and elicits a conservation-friendly ethos from that particular community. Of course, not to say that the scriptures of the followers of Sanatan have completely presented the crocodile in a positive frame. If you look at the at number three is that depiction from Vishnu Puran, where Indra's mount, the Airavat, the celestial elephant, is depicted to have been attacked by a crocodile again. So, all these things going into giving the crocodile an extremely negative projection. And if some of you may wonder, and somebody asked this question, probably not quite sure who's the one, but in the very first session, there was a question posed whether the Portuguese introduced crocodiles in Goa. I mean, everything in Goa seems to be attributed very unfairly to the Portuguese, though most certainly Portuguese have done a lot of good, as also, I would say, a lot of negative to the state historically. I mean, this is not the forum to kind of place before you the balance sheet of the plus and minus, but for the purpose of this webinar, in the light of the discussion, it's very important for all of you to know, and I share that with you, that image is of a Portuguese chronicler whose name was João Barros. And in a book that he wrote called Decade Segundo Livro Quinto, which is probably one of the documents that he wrote and authored, he writes that in Portuguese, and I'm just translating that with you, that the rivers were filled with lizards of the sea. Mind you, I repeat that. The rivers were filled with the lizards of the sea, whose mouths were often filled with cattle horns. And if you try to, retrospect and reconstruct the whole scenario, it is but obvious that this is a reference to the crocodiles. And further, it is again João Barros who documents this, that the crocodiles is certainly not brought in by the Portuguese. And I wish to clear this impression or the myth that the Portuguese brought in the crocodiles. João Barros says that 40 years prior to the conquest of Goa by the Portuguese, who subsequently ruled us for 450 years plus. I repeat, 40 years prior to the Portuguese conquest of Goa, Adil Shah, the Muslim ruler, and I'm glad my colleague, Dr. Utkarsha, rightly, she pulled it out of a gray matter and often explained to you that, and she was very sure that it wasn't the Portuguese, and she was right, that it was not the Portuguese, but Adil Shah, who's believed to have brought in this crocodile. And may I draw your attention to this small sketch here, where I have put something called Tiswadi, and I put a kind of a yellow demarcation around that. So the island of Tiswadi was to be protected against any kind of intrusion from the sea, and for which Adil Shah is supposed to have brought in the crocodiles and kind of put them in the waters there as a deterrent for any kind of invasion likely to come from the sea. I mean, that's, and I take this opportunity to propose that this probably could have been one of the earliest examples of biological warfare. Today, in the light of the various conspiracy theories of bioterrorism and so on and so forth with respect to SARS-CoV-2, there's a lot of questions being raised, especially with this the recent information that's being released to the world, that possibly the virus could have been genetically modified or engineered to kind of be so virulent. So, I mean, one of the earliest examples of biological warfare that can relate to my state of Goa is the introduction of crocodiles, supposedly by, based on the documentary historical evidence by Adil Shah, the Muslim ruler, who is supposed to have been the one who brought them here. And they have adapted very well. This is more or less the contemporary habitat of the muggers. And I just want to, I think this is one image which probably our member secretary, Dr. Pradeep Sarmukadamji, has also shown. I mean, this is one, if you can see my cursor on the screen, the high walk, as we call it, with all the belly lifted up from the ground, and the crocodile is actually moving to a kind of a dead end. That's the Arabian Sea. And I want to say this loud and clear. This is a freshwater species, basically, which has, as a matter of adaptation, in certain parts of its range is adapted to estuarine waters, but it certainly cannot tolerate the salinity of the sea per se. So if you have a crocodile which is actually heading for the Arabian Sea, in my opinion, it's a dead end. And this is most certainly an example of some sort of a vagrant behavior. And I mean, I just kind of somehow reached there. It has a known, I would say, behavior of walking over land in search of fresh waters again. So this could have been an accidental, a sort of, how would I put it? A sort of just movement, an unintentional movement that took it to a dead end, to say. And then on the right, I have a few satellite images. And I just want to draw your attention to this stretch, if you can see, is the Kumarzo Canal. This is more or less when, the bridge which we refer to as the Banastari Bridge. All along this, you can I hope you can see this. You have on either side of this canal, which is of course confluent with Mandavi on one side and the Zuari on the other, you have a very rich presence of mangroves, mangrove diversity. And I have to acknowledge that much of the work that I'm presenting before you and all the enthusiasm that I have received for this work comes from that one single gentleman who's no more with us, Dr. Arvind Untwale, the former ex-director of and principal scientist and mangrove expert of global acclaim, who enthused me, kind of literally provoked me to look at this more seriously, because he said, whenever I went to the field in search of mangroves, I would often cite the crocodiles. And this incidentally was way back in the 90s, my first ever sponsored research program by Worldwide Fund for Nature India, right? I mean, so it's quite interesting, but I wish this can be taken further. And of course, you please pay attention to the kind of urbanization or urban artifacts all around the Kumarzo Canal. You find a lot of landscape, degradation, and a lot of this wilderness and the wilderness is shrinking, of course. The habitat is also shrinking, and the lower map shows you 3 red spots to denote the veneration sites, in which is where in Goa we prominently have the cult of crocodile worship called Mange Tapni. The one here is in Burma, which is very close to Banastari. Then the one here is Madkai, which is again at the tip of the, the river Zuari down south Goa. And this is my ancestral village, which is Durbatwadi in Ponte Taluka. So this is more or less the contemporary habit. And now let me quickly run you through something extremely fascinating, but not in the realm of wildlife biology. And for many of us who probably want to know whether the cult of crocodile is something unique to the indigenous communities of Goa, I was talking to my senior colleague and a well-known figure in Goa, Dr. Nandakumar Kamath, who I suppose is logged in now, on understanding the ancestry of the Hindu Gaudas. And he told me quite possibly they could be proto-Australoids. So interestingly, in some parts of Australia, again, the Gumaj, G-U-M-A-T-J, I'm going to show you a slide a little later. The cult of crocodile worship still, it's probably, you still have people there, indigenous communities that look at the crocodile as the spiritual father. Of course, what you see on your screen at the moment is how the crocodile is, woven in a sort of a mosaic of, I would say, religion, rather culture, everything. I mean, it's awesome. For some, it's fearsome. For some, it is divine. For some, it is a cult symbol. For some, it is a totemic species. So this is very fascinating. I just want to tell you the people that you see here. Have a look at this, all these manfolk. And you will again understand something interesting, that in most of the crocodile cult expressions have a gender bias, in that the women are not allowed to partake or participate or even witness these rituals. For instance, if you go to Papua New Guinea, and that's a different species of crocodile, it's not the mugger or the Crocodilus palustris, but you have the Latnols, which is an ethnic tribe of this place. They have a belief system that their souls, all the departed ancestors manifest into animals. And that translates into very interesting, I'm sorry, some question? Yeah, I mean, so if I may continue, I was just talking about the Latmol ethnic tribes who worship the crocodile by encouraging, almost mandating, it's almost necessary as if for every young man of the tribe to get his back, have a look at this, scarified. I mean, in form of crocodile scutes, or, like a crocodile back with all this kind of scutes or dermaloscles. So, I mean, they have dedicated spirit houses called House Tambaran all along the Sepik River. And you'll realize something very interesting as I go on with my presentation, that most of the crocodile cult, in terms of worship, is in the riverine ecology, on the banks which are fertile. So it's got to do with in an agrarian culture. It's got to do with the cult of fertility. It's got to do with kind of appeasing spirits and elements of nature's natural elements that are benevolent to the agrarian communities, and therefore it's kind of offering your gratitude by way of the crocodile kind of symbolizes that spirit of agrarian culture, and that's what you get to see in the Latmols all along the Sepik River, mass scarification. So I think among the Latmol, the crocodile truly depicts and embodies the animist power of the Latmols. Let me take you further in this presentation. I was just talking about the Gumachis or Gumach. The lady on the right, who seems to be quite a modern lady going by the attire, is actually somebody who affiliates with the Gumach, and she's holding a kind of in a cloth on which you can very clearly see a caiman or a crocodile, perhaps. So again, for the Gumach of New Arnhem Land, which is again Northeast Arnhem Land, part of the Australian continent in proximity of that ocean, you have for the Gumach, the crocodile as a spiritual father. If you look at Gambia, for instance, I mean the one on the left, where you have the local with a very curious, a very enthusiastic visitor who's seeking to touch the crocodile. That itself is so very fascinating. Is from the Bakau town, and this tribe. I mean, these tribals are called the Bojans. They are the custodians. I mean, very curiously, certain tribes are given the custodianship of this reptile all over the world in the crocodilian range. So what exactly is this? It's a sacred pond, or maybe a sacred crocodiles in a certain pond called Kachikali Pool in Gambia's Bakau town, which is a touristic town, where the waters are supposed to be, it's not just holy, but having a medicinal property. It can cure a lot of ailments. And so the Bojang tribals give you a bottle filled with water, and there's absolutely no financial gratification. They don't charge. And they're not supposed to be using this assumed medicinal properties of the water in the Kachikali Pool for any financial gratification. Otherwise, there is a taboo that they will lose that, the curative property of the water. But all in all, what is very interesting is this translates into, how would I say, putting the crocodile on a high pedestal and trying to be kind to it, and at least, I would say, switching off all your aggression towards the animal. And that's a key component in coexistence and mitigating conflict. Then, of course, you have the Baru, which is the local word by the Gumach for the saltwater crocodile. And as I've already said, in Australia. And I think one of the most fascinating account of crocodile veneration comes from Egypt. And again, I seek to clear a myth today. I mean, some of you who would have heard about the Bride of the Nile, which is in their language called as Arouse el Nil, where they had this very, I would say, primitive and rather a draconian culture of sacrificing young, beautiful virgins to the Nile annually as a sort of propitiation of the Nile. So and then unfortunately, because the Nile was teeming with crocodiles, Crocodilus niloticus, everybody had ended up with the impression that the Nile crocodile demands a human sacrifice. So, you know, that connect is a little deceptive. So today, let me clarify a few things. First of all, the crocodiles have been something sacred to the Egyptians. You find a lot of mummified crocodiles in Egyptian temples, the excavation sites. You see in this particular, artifact, you can very clearly see a king feeding, making offerings to the crocodile, a live one, mind you, a live one. Probably a lot of these docile crocodiles were held in captivity. And you may ask me, I mean, how can you really have a crocodile which would accept this kind of offerings from you? Just wait for a few slides after this. Even today in places which are most unusual for this kind of a cult in our neighborhood, Bangladesh and Pakistan, there is the cult of crocodile worship in a place called Magarpir. And I'm going to explain that to you a little later. Just bear with me for a couple of minutes. Let's finish first with the Egyptian story. So on the banks of the Nile, which of course has been the epicenter of a civilization, the banks being extremely fertile allowed agriculture. And understand this very clearly, for accretion to bring in a lot of fertile clay on the banks, you needed the hydrodynamics to be suitable. So annually the river would flood, bringing with it a lot of fertile clay or silt and deposit on the river banks, which allowed the people there, the agrarian tribes, to carry on with their, excuse me, smell please, to carry on with their, agriculture. So in a sense, this is more towards paganism or a pagan cult where you reciprocate all the gifts that you receive from nature. You cannot be exploiting nature in a mode of indifference to feelings of the natural objects and natural elements. So kind of they see life, they see a spirit in absolutely the entire spectrum of nature. And in a gesture or reciprocation or appropriating that spirit, they would literally dump a virgin into the rivers. I mean, that's a small depiction. A lot of Egyptologists today argue that this is a wrong portrayal and it's damaged the reputation of Egypt. But this is again a viewpoint. I mean, nobody would now want to accept that something as draconian and as as terrible as this could ever happen at any point in time in history, that you actually dump young maidens into the river just as a matter of propitiating or appeasing that river, just because it's giving you a lot of fertile silt or clay. Now, very interestingly, in Egypt, you also have this notion of sobak, also known as suchos or sebak, which is believed to be dealing with virility. It's a divine spirit, which was held in extremely special esteem by certain tribes all along the Nile belt. I mean, as I said again, and therefore, the Sobek has been what manifested as a crocodile-headed god that never asked for any kind of human sacrifice. And it was actually being offered, meat and those kind of offerings by kings and all the subjects. Whereas the dumping of virgins into the Nile had to do with Hapi, the god of annual flooding, and mind you, again, this is very interesting. I'm seeking to draw a connection between the story which I'm going to narrate to you about the curious case of crocodile worship in Goa, which has a lot of commonalities and similarities with what you see in Egypt. So again, here is what I was trying to talk about, the crocodile-headed god called the Sobak or the Suchos or Sebak, variously known. This is again a live crocodile, and this is a small depiction of how the Egyptians at some point in time ceremoniously dumped maidens, young virgin maidens, into the river as a matter. Well, you may ask me, is that only about Egypt and this part? What about the Americas? Well, in Mayo-American civilization, which is from Mexico southwards, right into Central America, you have, I'm just going to go quickly. I just want to draw your attention to this first figure, which is taken from a Mayan book, a Mayo culture or Mayo American. It's a kind of Maya is a cult there, a Maya, however you pronounce that. So in one of the earliest available Mayan book relating to that culture is Dresden Codex. I mean, in that again, you have a peculiar kind of a figure which resembles a two-headed caiman or crocodile which is called Izamna. Izamna, incidentally, also happens to be one of the gods. Another depiction of Izamna, which is actually a two-headed caiman, the pictorial presentation, also seems to be in some sects viewed as the god of medicine. And he is put, kind of on par with Chax, the rain deity. Again, may I draw your attention? Rain, an indispensable ingredient to support your soil fertility or agriculture. So look at this commonality that wherever there has been a cult of crocodile worship, it has had to do with something very definitely with an agrarian culture. Coming more closer to our own country, I mean, this is amusing, absolutely. Nobody would believe that in predominantly in an Islamic faith country like Pakistan, you have a place, called Mangupir. I mean, this is very fascinating. Where a particular community who have some connect with Africa, they're called the Chidis. I mean, if you look at them, they have a lot of Negroid features. And it's a small minority community, which actually they were brought in Indian subcontinent, the undivided India then, for the purpose of as slaves actually, for slavery. And they've settled there in Pakistan, and they actually practice the Islamic faith. And annually, this is very interesting, they have a certain place where they worship crocodiles. I mean, that pond today is actually teeming with too many crocodiles. I mean, they've been fast breeders, and they get a lot of, I would say, offerings of food, and that's just perfect for them. And they've probably become very sluggish and lost a lot of their aggressive instincts and whatever. But what is very interesting is these community members, affiliates, have their mannat or whatever wish they have. And if that wish is fulfilled, they have to come and pay the obeisance to the crocodiles. And the crocodile, this is very interesting. Annually, they have something called Shidi Mela. Mela, yeah, Urs, jo bhi hai. And then in that, the Gaddi Nashi, which is, again, you have a certain member of that clan identified to be the custodian of the holy crocodiles. He will actually call one of the chief crocodiles. I mean, that sounds very interesting and a little ridiculous, but then chief in the sense of the alpha dominant male. And this is Crocodilus palustris, by the way. These are muggers. And as both the speakers have chosen to highlight, that the cognitive ability of the crocodiles is praiseworthy. They can identify people. They have a reasonably good cognitive ability. So they actually, you find, as you can see in the figure, the crocodile walks up and is being garlanded by the Gadinashi. And this crocodile, the chieftain, I mean, kind of, the alpha male is also called the Mor Sahib. So look at that divine status, the kind of a position of authority, a position of divinity bestowed upon the crocodile by the Shidi community. Similarly, again, in Bangladesh, I think Dr. Utkarsha has a few colleagues in Bangladesh who've been working on crocodiles. So we had a lot of questions on whether we have crocodiles and which species and whatever. But there's definitely a place in Bagherhat. There is a place in Bagherhat, Bangladesh, where there is this sacred pond. It's meant to be a. May I request somebody's mic is on, please. Kindly mute yourself. My request to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So in Bagherhat in Bangladesh, again, a mausoleum of Khan Jahan Ali, a saint, that again, it's symbolic gesture to go and feed those crowds. It's a Sufi saint. Now, of course, this is something that the audience from Gujarat will quickly relate to. Just as you have the Hindu Gaudas in Goa, you have the Chaudhries and the Gamits and the Vasavas in Gujarat, especially the South Gujarat, for whom the crocodile manifests into a sort of an icon or a wooden carved deity called the Mogra Dev. So again, Mogra becomes the Magar. So look at the connect. So that's again very fascinating. And I think I just chose to pick up one figure that one of the most popular deities of Gujarat, the Khodiyar Mata, is also depicted with crocodile as a Vahan. If you look at any idol, the anthropomorphic, manifestation of this deity, she's always shown standing on the crocodile or with the crocodile. So it so happened in the month of June 2019, a couple of years, that one of the muggers from the adjacent pond kind of ventured into one of the temples, which happened to be a Khodiyar Mata temple. And then, of course, the whole village folks turned out to the temple, and they obstructed the rescue squad from translocating and rescuing the animal. So, I mean, that's got to do with faith again. Very interestingly, these stories are from mainland. What about the Andaman? My colleague, Dr. Preeti, who's been working at the Port Blair ZSI, I mean, she's done a doctoral studies on marine biodiversity. She told me this very interesting, and I was quite amused that even as far as Andaman, where, she tells me that these are probably the Bengalis who settled in Andaman. They're primarily into fishing. So, I mean, they have this annual celebration called Kumbir Puja or Kumir Puja, which is, again, a sort of how would I say, an expression towards gratitude for not destroying the fish potential of the waters, with which, or rather, in which this crocodile, which of course in Andaman is probably not the mugger, but the saltwater crocodile, it's called salties, Crocodilus porosus. That's an apex predator in the Andaman waters. So what do they do? I mean, look at this. This is very interesting. In the courtyard, and I believe if they do that, they have to do it for 3 consecutive years. So in the North Andaman, again, you have some of the settlers who have taken with them the cult of crocodile worship. That's called Kumbir Puja. And last but not least, let me tell you, this is the mainstay of my whole presentation, the Hindu Gaudas of Goa, to a large extent, agrarian ethnic communities who reside in the hamlets along the Kumbarza Canal. Annually, as per the Paush, I mean, Hindu calendar, the month of Paush, the first Amavasya or the new moon, they all assemble, and these are all people who are into agricultural occupation. And as the story goes, and that at some point in time in history, I think Dr. Pradeep has already said this, but let me repeat it for the benefit of those who missed out on that, it seems at some point of time in history when the canal was, there were heavy rains, event of extreme precipitation used to happen even those days, which flooded the canal, and there was a flash flood inundating all the paddy fields and destroying the crop. Rice, Oryza sativa, cannot tolerate salt. I mean, it needs proper water. So with this inundation and loss of crop, the villagers went to the Budwant, as we call it, somebody with Bud, or somebody who's more wiser than the rest of the folks. And he said, look, as per our religion or as per our faith, there is a presiding deity for every element of nature. So now what is your problem? That you've had these floods and you've had a loss of crop because of inundation, and therefore probably the god rains are up, the gods are rain upset with you. And who's that? As per Hindu mythology, it is Varun Dev, Varun, right? So I mean, and in mythology, the Lord Varun is always shown to be having his Vahan as the crocodile. Incidentally or coincidentally, and that's an amazing cult again. You've had a lot of these crocodiles, and I've been saying this from the very first slide, that the Kumbarza Canal and the associated mangroves is a key to conserving crocodiles in Goa. If the mangroves disappear, if the mangroves shrink, it's going to be a blow to crocodile conservation. And therefore, the village elderman said, you need to appease, you need to offer your apologies, you need to do anything absolutely. You need to probably have an element of sacrifice, though not on lines of what they did in Egypt. That is not acceptable. So you have a sort of a symbolic sacrifice of a chick, a small bird, and you perform a ritual as, again, exactly a lot of reflection of what happens in Latmuls or Gomads or, the Gambian tribes in the world over, in Egypt. So what do? They all assemble, they scoop silt from the very same inundated paddy field where the crops have been destroyed, and they give it a shape of a crocodile. As you can see, he's the village headman. And this is how they make the crocodile dummies, or, it's not, after all, an exhibition of sculpture or something like that. It has to very grossly resemble the reptile, and I think it does. And how do they do that? They craft it using clay, silt, all kind of natural ingredients. They decorate that with skew. I mean, you look at this, look at the finer points. The empty shells, the clam shells are used to create scutes or scales and whatever. And then they scoop out a little mud from here and put a small chick. They don't kill it, of course. They just put it there and cover it with a coconut shell. And then the most important part, they gather. They have a community prayer called Garane, as we call it in vernacular. And they all pray for a good bounty of crop. And they seek, pardon and forgiveness for anything wrong that they would have inadvertently or unknowingly done to, sort of invite the wrath of the rain gods. And that's how the whole thing goes. And mind you, again, just like the Latmuls and some of these people, there is a strong taboo that women are not allowed to, witness this. Outsiders, they have certain clans and they have certain, I would say, jurisdictions, and people from beyond the jurisdiction are not supposed to partake and, participate in the celebration. It's strictly within that. And therefore, now a lot of you here from people who are rigorously trained in, this domain of verification, where our minds are so bogged down with demanding validations and peer reviews and everything, may ask me, what nonsense is this? Are you in 2020 when you're talking about some primitively, primitive folk religious response as something which is extremely, meaningful towards conserving the crocodiles? Well, yes. Because I've said this before, and let me say it again as a matter of concluding, part of my talk, that we have forgotten that people are an integral part of the wildlife habitats where they share space with crocodiles. So you have to understand the nuances of their anthropology, their culture, their lifestyles, their practices, and attempt to integrate that. I mean, why should unless you incentivize the community participation in a conservation program, they're not going to be with you. If you want to bring them on board, you need to talk to them in a language that they understand. You need to recognize their culture. You need to appreciate their culture, and you need to demystify what is seemingly a primitive folk religious response that replicates pregnant with a conservation ethos. And it has been validated globally. I don't think they need to talk about any validation. I think all along the Kumbarza Canal, if anybody attempts to do anything which is anti-conservation, either by way of poaching or trapping or nest robbing, it's not acceptable. They would behave exactly the way the story of Bishnois and how there was poaching by one of the matinee idols and film stars. They literally wanted to lynch him. And that same spirit of custodianship and responsibility towards the crocodile is what you witness also among the Hindu Gaudas. So I would say they're absolutely the first rung or level of custodianship as far as the crocodiles of Goa are concerned. I'm sorry to say, but the academia, the researchers, the statutory bodies come later. The first custodianship of the crocodiles of Goa rests with these communities, the Gaudas. And they are the ones who've been extremely, protective about this, and because they realize it's important to have the crocodile. They may not understand the complexities of science, but to them, there is something which they've been religiously following year after year. Of course, there are some issues that the present generation is kind of raising a lot of questions on the significance of these. They think that this is something very archaic and something which is redundant and obsolete, and it makes no sense to them. Nonetheless, I'm happy to share with you. The practice is still going on year after year, at least in few definite locations, all along the crocodile habitat in the Kumbarza Canal. So all that I have attempted to showcase today, it ultimately boils down to this. If somebody asks me, what is the contemporary conservation status of the muggers or crocodiles of Goa, this is what I have to say. Number one, top of the list, if you want to save and conserve the crocodiles in Goa, you have to look at it holistically by looking at conserving the habitat, which is, of course, the mangroves. So all kinds of pressures on the mangrove vegetation all along the Kumbarza Canal has to be, we need to tread the path very carefully. Development, navigation, what have you, you've got a whole list, the whole bouquet of what you seek to do in terms of infrastructure and development material. We need that, of course. I am not anti-development, but certain wild spaces have to be left as such. You and I should not attempt to, dilute the wilderness with certain spaces in our midst, because I always say that coexistence has always been there. The conflict begins now. So you want to revert back to coexistence, you need to respect space. It's all got to do with your jurisdiction. You don't step into their territory, and they would certainly not, intrude into yours. So at the moment, the habitat is under a lot of pressure. It's shrinking, fragmenting, lots of activities which I've already shown and therefore now we are worried there is a lot of spillover happening throughout the state. You find crocodiles appearing in places where you would never expect them to. And what is the reason? I think it's a simple basic concept of how when the population recruitment happens very regularly, and if all the variables are optimal, there's a certain spatial limit on how many animals could be accommodated in a certain space. If that limit is violated, and that's what we call as violation of carrying capacity, then the crocodiles are going to disperse. They'll start spilling over. That's a spillover. And as I say, I say this loud and clear. Spillover is a prequel to a conflict, which is a sequel. If you want to avoid the sequel, you avoid the prequel. That's very important. So in that connection, I think the indigenous communities of Gauda, by sanctifying or by extending deification or deification, or some sort of a sacred status onto the reptile, has done a great job. And this annual ritual called Mange Tapni is a cultural dimension with extreme conservation value. And I think that needs to be recognized, that needs to be rewarded, and it has to be incentivized. And I think the whole discussion on PBR, which is happening across in the country, where under the aegis of National Biodiversity Act and the biological diversity rules, if you're mandated to come up with a PBR, right, People's Biodiversity Register, I think this is exactly what needs to be documented and recognized. And the community that's the way to get the community on board. The PBR is not, a pure. I mean, I would say it's got nothing to do with H-index, and it's got nothing to do with Elsevier publication. This is a document to be written by lay people, the so-called bare feet ecologists. So I want to say this loud and clear that the Hindu Gaudas of Goa and all the indigenous communities, we have 4 of them. You've got the Dangar, Gauris, you've got the Velips, you've got the Kunbis, you've got the Gaudas. Fascinating ethos. I mean, I don't think we can teach them anything. Rather, we need to learn from them. We need to attempt to understand their seemingly primitive folk religious conduct in a more scientific framework. That's our task. It's not a question of demystifying science to them, rather understanding their culture in a scientific context. And that's what is very, very important. I think that's the last slide. I hope I've been able to put across this fascinating, cultural response of the local indigenous communities of Gauda. And I have to say a word of acknowledgement to my late father, Shri Ramakant Borkar, who was a native of this Durbat Wadi. As a child, he grew up saying these things, and he shared that with me when I just completed my master's way back in the mid-80s, and I was itching to go to the field and do some research. He said, look, he was not a great proponent of white coat biology, in the labs with a very sophisticated paraphernalia, where you kind of move it better. I mean, I'm not belittling, don't get me wrong, but he was a man of the field. And he said, you do something for the community. You understand, first of all, their ethos, their wisdom. They've got a lot of traditional ecological knowledge systems, which are still not being decoded. And I think this is an important task that rests upon our shoulders, may not be my shoulders, because I'm on my way out. We are more close to the exit. A lot of youngsters who have probably logged in today, it's my honest appeal to all of you. Well, you certainly dream of, joining some great infrastructure and labs and do state-of-the-art research. But look around you. I feel the entire field, your entire landscape is challenging you to a lot of research opportunities of this kind. You need to also spare some attention to decoding our local cultural ethos. And that's all that I have to say. Thank you so much. God bless you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very informative session, and you've thrown a lot of light on the problems of ecotourism, and you've also spoken about the the global kind of worship or veneration that crocodiles receive in various tribes all across the world. And I'm sure that though we may have known about our local worship, which we have in Kumajua, I'm sure that many of us were not really aware of the global aspect of how crocodile worship is taking place. So I have a few questions for you. From Dr. Subhash Bhosle, he asks if there is any cannibalistic nature of crocodiles, and is it one of the cause for their decline?
Well, between the crocs, not really. I mean, especially the crocodile mothers are extremely protective of their hatchlings and would not generally allow any other conspecific to venture anywhere close to their, the nest or say. And there's nothing really on records to suggest that the muggers are cannibals per se. But they're scavengers. Probably a dead crocodile carcass floating in the river could be opportunistically taken in, but by design, no. Muggers, at least, not that I know of. Not that I know.
Thank you, sir. Ria Lopez has asked something in regards to the history of the crocodiles coming back into Goa. If there is any record of translocation of crocodiles by Adil Shah, and if any idea how this was done?
No, well, I mean, that is for the historians to kind of get into the depth of it. For me, as a student of, I would say, cultural anthropology, it suffices to refer to a more authentic chronicle by Zouan Baruch, who has been a very respected man of letters. So very honestly, if you ask me about specifics or how these were translocated, I mean, that's fascinating. Again, I don't seek to belittle the seriousness of the question. I think that's a very genuine question, but I am not competent to respond to that.
Okay, sir, but thank you. And one more question from Ms. Varsha Kamat. She says, I stay in Kottari and have seen some major road construction parallel to the Agasa and Kumbarjoa mangroves since the last 2 years. The mud banks along the canal are the basking sites for the crocodiles, and they have practically been destroyed. So would you like to say something about this?
Certainly, yes. I think you could get your grievance redressed by approaching the local biodiversity management committee, which is I would rather say a very powerful local statutory body if they desire. And if you're able to convince them with your concern, I think they can most certainly act towards probably, having a dialogue with the proponents of the road.
Sir, one last question I will pose to you from Nikita Mangeshkar. Ms. Nikita Mangeshkar, have any invasive species harmed the crocodile population in Goa?
Not that. Well, I mean, honestly, no research has been done in this regard per se, but I believe that's more unlikely to be so, unless it is a species of some pathogenic potential. And as Dr. Kamath has been repeatedly posting, there's huge scope to kind of document and investigate this kind of, the pathogens, the viruses, and the whole load and the whole cocktail of pathogens which could reside within that population. We don't know. And by virtue of the confluence of and the proximity of the port waters to the crocodile habitat, quite possibly some alien species could have come in through the ballast water operations. It can happen. I think it's the apprehension has a lot of basis in terms of the dynamics of discharge of ballast water in our port waters. Most certainly this can happen. But as of now, there are no indications, or rather I would say there is no research directed at understanding this possibility. Thank you, but that's a fascinating question.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. And I'm sure that by this sessions that we've had, that a lot of young researchers may be encouraged to focus their attention on these creatures as well. As you said, there is a lot of scope for research to be done still, because this is quite an unexplored area. So I'm sure that you may have piqued an interest of the young researchers to go forward in this area. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to tell the participants that the link to the feedback form will be sent in the chat box, and we request you all to fill the form, and after which you will be given an e-certificate which will be sent to your registered email. So kindly make sure to fill in the feedback form. I now call upon Miss Vinita Desa, the Assistant Professor, Department of Zoology, Carmel College, to express a word of gratitude. Miss Vinita. Hello, Miss Vinita, are you here?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me, Karen?
Ma'am, can you speak a bit louder, please?
Yes. Can you hear me, Karen?
Yeah.
Yes. Good evening to one and all. I'm Vinita Desa, faculty, Department of Zoology, Carmel College. It is my pleasure and privilege to express a word of gratitude and appreciation to all those who have contributed in making this regional webinar on conservation concerns of mugger crocodile a grand success. At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to our institutional authorities for their constant encouragement and support to reach out to the community at large. I gratefully acknowledge the Goa State Biodiversity Board for partnering with us and for their logistic support. I thank our principal, Dr. Aldina Braganza, for addressing us and for her support and encouragement to our department. I am grateful to Dr. Pradeep Sarmokadam, Member Secretary, Goa State Biodiversity Board, for readily agreeing to support the webinar and also accepting to deliver the keynote address. The statutory functionary, like the Member Secretary, GSBB, being the keynote speaker, is an endorsement of our effort at conservation outreach programs. A big thank you to Dr. Utkarsha Chavan and to architect Karina Kocheri for willingly agreeing to address this webinar and sharing their interesting work on this iconic reptile. Special thanks to our HOD and convener of today's webinar, Dr. Manoj Borkar, for collaborating with the Goa State Biodiversity Board and meticulously planning the webinar, as well as sharing his work on the crocodiles of Kumbarzua Canal. A word of appreciation to the organizing secretary, Ms. Andrea D'Souza, for all the efforts put in to ensure that the webinar is effectively organized. She has maintained a channel of communication between both the organizing bodies as well as the speakers of the day. My sincere appreciation to the technical session committee, Dr. Sister Maria Lizanne Resi, Dr. Priti Pereira, Ms. Sonia Desai, and Ms. Reshma Kerkar, along with her team at GSBB for their technical assistance. Thanks also to the registration committee, Ms. Karen Braganza and Ms. Swizzle Furtado, for their efforts in effectively communicating with the participants. Special thanks to our system administrator, Mr. Mariston Dias, for providing us technical support. A word of appreciation to our compere, Ms. Karen Braganza, for the smooth conduct of today's webinar. A very big thank you to each and everyone for attending our webinar. We commit ourselves to have many more such webinars in future. We hope and pray the message of conservation is well taken and it shall spread far and wide and we become ambassadors of conservation, of biodiversity at large. Last but not the least, we thank the Almighty for the graces and blessings bestowed upon us. Thank you once again. Stay safe. God bless us all.
Thank you, ma'am. We now come to an end to our webinar for today, and I would like to thank all of the participants for your enthusiastic participation in the webinar and all of your insightful questions that you have posed to our speakers. And if any of your questions have not been answered, we will definitely get back to you. And I think you have also have the information, contact details of our speakers as well, so we can maybe have contact with them. Again, I would remind the participants to please fill in the feedback form. The link has been posted. And if anybody wants to have a recap of this, their recording is available on the YouTube channel of the GSBB as well. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our vibrant and dynamic department will continue to bring more such informative and relevant webinars to you in the future. Thank you once again, and I will bid you all a good evening.